For Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander viewers, sometimes our stories or images we share may have reference to our elders and community members who have passed on to the ancestors.
Yama, and welcome to our first online professional learning session. Our session today is about honouring First Nations women in early childhood, and in particular we'll be speaking about Annette Sue, or Dr Sue Atkinson, who is a Yorta Yorta woman from Victoria. We would like to acknowledge the ancestral lands, waterways and skies of the Cammeraygal and Wurundjeri nations. We'd also like to acknowledge the ancestral lands, waterways and skies of all First Nations peoples from where you are joining us today. We pay our respects to the elders, past, present and future.
Wah. My name's Annette and I'm a Tangwarang woman from central Victoria. I live in Melbourne on Wurundjeri country in Naarm. And I've been working in Yarnstrong Sista for 17 years now, and I'm really excited to be here with my titta Priscilla.
Thanks, Tira. I'm Priscilla Reid-Loynes, and I'm a Reid-Loynes. I'm currently living on Cammeraygal country, but my traditional lands are in northwest New South Wales. I grew up in a town called Walgett, on the banks of the Namoy and the Barwon, and it's pretty special to be sitting with Annette and having this yarn today, because Annette and I actually met when my daughter, who is now 20, was actually at 4-year-old kinder, and Annette had come to chair the possum hunt show.
And I got to meet your mum as well.
Yes, yep. Gunny was there. Little Gunny was there, and Annette came and she shared the possum hunt show, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that today as we go through our session. I think I just want to let everyone know that this is our first time recording, and so it's a little bit of a different way for us to yarn.
And we feel really fortunate to be here talking about Dr Sue Atkinson Lopez, because she over many years has been one of our amazing mentors, and it's really important that we talk about hearing the voice of Aboriginal women.
Absolutely. She, we first met. I met Annette Sue when Annette and I first met. So, but Annette, you met Annette Sue before then.
Yeah, when I was a student back in 1991. I was doing the Aboriginal childcare course, and Sue was my lecturer. So we have a very, very long friendship, and I feel so fortunate to have met Sue in my travels.
Yeah, Yeah, absolutely. She's been a mentor to us all, and we're privileged to stand with an amazing, strong Yorta Yorta woman. So, yeah.
And we've got a map here that shows you all the different Aboriginal languages that were spoken in Victoria prior to colonisation. And our different language groups are in a huge state of reviving our languages. And so throughout our session, you might hear us speak some of our own languages, because that's really important to us.
Yeah, absolutely. And you also might hear a bit of our the city landscape on Cammergale country, and you also might hear a bit of rustling. The brush turkeys are out in force at the moment, so that's not us building the nest, that's the birds. And we're really grateful that it's a bit cold, because then there's no snakes living around us either.
I've already checked near this rock.
All right, so
So Sue's Yorta Yorta, and we mentioned that. So if you have a look on the map, on the border of Victoria and New South Wales, you can see Echuca, and along the Murray River is Yorta Yorta country.
and we're all river women.
Yeah,
Hey,
yeah.
we're all river women. So we thought it was lovely to be able to share this yarn about the river, not far from a river at the moment where we're situated too.
And Sue's family, as a little girl, Sue's mum lived on Cumragundra Mission. So if you've seen the movie The Sapphires, have you seen that movie? Yeah? Well, in the movie where you see Nan singing in language with her granddaughters, that's Yorta Yorta language.
So the next map that's in our presentation is actually the language map of New South Wales, and so I'm from Cammergale country, which is up the top, as you can see, and we just, I guess we wanted to show the maps too, to situate where, so that everyone has an understanding of where we are, which place we are, which Aboriginal land we come from, and which Aboriginal land we're sitting, that we work on each day. Shows a diagram of a framework for thinking with First Nations women in early childhood. And what I wanted to do with this was to acknowledge that as First Nations women right across the world and within our local spaces, we hold and have knowledge around our own child rearing practices, our own systems of education.
Yes.
And so this framework was developed for us to be thinking with these understandings, and I guess it's also a way of a resurgence of First Nations women's knowledge. But when we think about these four particular areas, it's understanding that, this all sits within a larger framework of knowledge systems, so Indigenous peoples or First Peoples knowledge systems. We're creating this space and so that we can speak with and share with our knowledge systems within the space, this Western space of early childhood education. So the first thing I have on the top, if you look at the diagram, is First Nations women's voices in children's literature. So in this particular presentation, we'll be speaking about Annette Sue's work around that, her research, and which also then led her to develop, to write and author children's picture books. We'll also be looking at First Nations women's knowledge systems of fibres, possum fur and grasses, and we'll talk more about how we've used those in our practices and how that links to the research from Dr Sue Atkinson. We'll also look at First Nations women's knowledge systems and pedagogy, so in particular storytelling. and then First Nations women's voices in the early childhood community. So we're also acknowledging that there are many women's voices that have joined us within our spaces of learning. And if you look at the diagram, you'll see that they're all interlinked. All those circles are interlinked, and that's to show that one particular area is linked to many other areas.
That's right. So interconnection.
Absolutely, yeah. That interconnection between all of these different areas within a larger First Nations women's knowledge system.
So this is a photograph of the beautiful Sue, and I'd like to share a little story with you about Sue's PhD. In 2010, Sue completed her research, Indigenous Early Childhood Curriculum and Self-Determination in Victoria. Sue interviewed 30 Aboriginal people from her local early childhood community. She interviewed 4 Aboriginal elders. She interviewed Aboriginal parents and Aboriginal children who were attending early childhood services. She also interviewed Aboriginal early childhood educators as well. And what was really special about and important about this research was that not only did she interview people in Melbourne in an urban setting, she also interviewed Aboriginal people in 2 rural areas of Victoria as well. And the families who were interviewed came from many different parts of Australia. Some families were from New South Wales, others were from South Australia. There were Murray families. So it wasn't just people from Victoria, and that was also about the diversity of our communities. Did you lose your earring?
Yeah.
Sue has many years of experience working in the early childhood sector. She believes that she was one of the first Aboriginal kindergarten teachers in Melbourne, and so she had worked in mainstream kindergartens prior to becoming a lecturer for Swinburne University, or what was then Paran TAFE. So the Victorian Aboriginal Childcare Agency, in conjunction with Paran TAFE, ran the Aboriginal Childcare course for Aboriginal community. And Sue started teaching in that role from 1985 until 1991. She, over the years, was a very supportive person to students, and she was an amazing mentor. And those women went on to work or continue to work at Yapra Children's Services in Thornbury. So she built up the self-esteem and Aboriginal resilience of the young women who took part in the course. Sue has gone on to teach at Melbourne University.
Also, Sue was a part of what was originally known as North Melbourne Institute of Technology, so NMIT, but then had a name change over to Melbourne Polytechnic. So Sue was really instrumental in the development of the subjects and the course there with Karina Davies, who's in charge of that. And Sue has mentored staff and continues to play a role in mentoring staff that come in to teach that subject and support students and the educators or the lecturers that are delivering that subject.
So her very long affiliation with both Aboriginal community,
yes,
but also the wider community.
Yes.
And we'd like to share a quote from Voices and Visions. So
this is from Sue's writing within Voices and Visions, which is edited by Dr Karen Martin. So Sue says, I have been sharing the voices of Victorian Aboriginal early childhood community, those elders, parents, children and Aboriginal early childhood professionals who generously gave their opinions and perspectives produced the rich narratives which form the foundations of my research. And so when we think about that, Annette, I know for me that what I really take from Auntie Sue's mentoring is listening to everyone else's stories. And that by gathering those stories and sharing those stories, we actually begin to create a space where Aboriginal families' voices are heard within early childhood. And that's why this is really important, because that's one of the, I guess, the key findings that came from Sue's research.
That's right. It was around what Aboriginal parents want for their children who are attending early childhood services. And then that also informed the topic around building authentic relationships with Aboriginal families and communities. Who was working, running the Aboriginal child. While Sue was working, teaching within the Aboriginal childcare course, she met the late Auntie Iris Lovett-Gardner. Auntie Iris was a Gunditj Mara elder teacher and activist, and she was involved in the oral history program at Koori College. And she really taught Sue so much about Aboriginal pedagogy, and they worked together on developing the Passing It On package. And it's really beautiful how in all these years, thousands of children across Victoria have continued to hear the voice of Auntie Iris through the Possum Hunt Puppet Show. And when I was a student at Brunswick, at a childcare centre in Brunswick, Sue encouraged me to conduct the puppet show as part of my placement. And so this is a story about Auntie Iris's childhood adventure about how her and her brother Charlie would go hunting for possums. And see, Auntie Iris grew up on Lake Condomission. They were only allowed to hunt one day a week, and that's when they would go possum hunting. So it's a contemporary story with traditional aspects within it, and really I think one of the most important things about that story is it challenges the stereotypes of what Aboriginal culture is.
Yes. Let us think about the pedagogy that's within the Possum Hunt puppet show.
Yeah.
I remember when you came to Sarah's kinder that for Sarah, the biggest thing that she took away from the story and from the Possum Hunt puppet show was that culture happens every day. And that for her at the time, she had really blonde hair like yourself, and she saw herself in you. So for her, having an Aboriginal woman come and share stories in the same way that she would hear stories in her own home, and about those everyday lived experiences was really important for her, and she carries that story through to this day and often reflects on that, and she's held on to those teachings within that story. So the pedagogies, particularly around oral storytelling, the pedagogy around tracking country.
Because see, Charlie was a really good tracker. So he would be tracking the lizard tracks. He'd also be tracking mother emu, and but he was also a bit of a trickster. So he was always playing tricks on the girls, and one time he put a lizard in Iris's bed. So as a way of sort of paying her back or getting her back, she decided in the story that she would play a trick on him out in the bush. And so, you know, those concepts of children being taught to be observant comes through in the story. Because traditionally Aboriginal children were taught the skills of knowing their environment. and knowing culture around when it was time to fish for eel, or when it was time to collect different types of berries.
Yes, yeah. And that environmental knowledge, I mean, it's still really important today. And children, we still live that way.
Yeah.
We still do those practices, live that practice. And one of the things I take from that, Annette, is when, I go up on country with my elders, and I might go out with the aunties, and the auntie will say, "See that grass over there?" And I'll be looking, and I cannot see which particular grass she is talking about. And I'll tell you what, she can point out a particular grass in the middle of a field of grasses, out in the middle of the bush, that is flat country, and auntie knows. She knows that. And so when you're living on country and you see those signs of what is happening on country, it tells you a story. There's a story that country's sharing with us, and I think about where we're sitting today, actually just up, like a couple of metres away from us, is a possum box, and on that tree are actually possum tracks. So when we've gone, we've been walking through this area here, and I saw a possum's tail hanging out of the trap, out of the box, and I said to my husband, "There's a possum up there," and he goes, "Where?" And he's looking all around, and I said, "Come with me." He goes, "No, there's not." And I show him, there's his little tail, and I said, "And look on the tree, there are the tracks." And I learnt that possum track, about possum tracking from Auntie Iris. But what we do is we think about, okay, what does that possum mean in the context of our community as a Gamilaroi family? What does possum mean for us? And so there's these beautiful similarities between our mobs. These connections. And so you can live in the city and share this story of Auntie Iris and Charlie being out on country, and yet children are still connecting to that, because we're connecting through those fibres, those elements of story that are similar. So when we think about that, we think about the possum fur.
And I was also going to say too, like, I think that Auntie Iris and Sue had real foresight in the way that they documented and designed the Possum Hunt Puppet Show, because at the same time that they were developing this story, Aboriginal women like Vicky Cousins, who's a Gunditj Mara woman, and Karina Ham and Lee Durrick, who are Yorta Yorta women, that was the start of the revival of making possum skin cloaks. So even now, 20 years on, I see how important, that both these things were happening at the same time. But I suppose back then I didn't realise. Because I didn't have the knowledge that I have today. So I do see that as being part of Aboriginal pedagogy.
Absolutely, it is, and that knowledge of possum, where to find it. For our listeners, Annette, that don't live here with us, I guess we better tell them where we get our possums from.
So possum is protected in Australia, so we're not allowed to hunt or kill possum, so we have to buy possum pelts from New Zealand. And see, what traditionally, when a baby was born, 8 possum skin pelts were sewn together with kangaroo sinew, and there was a special story that was etched on to the leather side of the cloak. And we say Walert, Walert, which means rug of the possum. That's in Tangwarang language. And so the possum skin was part of a birth-to-death way of life. And so when we go out and we share the Possum Hunt Puppet Show, we actually share about the traditions and the importance as well in a contemporary way, because we continue to revive the making of the possum skins now.
Yes. And I think it's drawing on this piece of writing from Auntie Sue within Voices and Visions. From her research, she says that a dialogue began to emerge between the Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal early childhood communities in the research, both in concert and both in conflict with Aboriginal voices. And it was this certain conflict that highlighted the need for a reconceptualisation of Aboriginalities if we, as Australian early childhood communities, are to better address those issues of race, culture, identity and racism that continue to see Aboriginal communities marginalised within early childhood programs. So one of the challenging things that have happened to us when we've both been out to share the possum hunt is that we've been challenged by people's understanding of who an Aboriginal woman is that is going to deliver the program. But that is why it is important that we continue to show and share this knowledge of the possum hunt and many of our other stories, and that they're delivered by Aboriginal people, because this is an important part of challenging those ongoing understandings of stereotypes in Australia.
And, there have been times when Auntie Iris's story has been rejected. And people and educators have said, well, this isn't what we expected, because they wanted something that was more traditional, what they saw as being more traditional, maybe stereotyped as what Aboriginal culture is. And that still does continue today. Like even though we've been conducting the puppet show for so many years, we still have our Yarnstrong Sister Aboriginal storytellers who are being challenged. So, and this is why we realise the work that we do is really important.
And when we think about, I guess, if you were to think back to the framework that I talked about around First Nations women in early childhood, and we think about what we've just been discussing, we begin to understand that we're hearing First Nations women's voices in children's literature through oral storytelling. So Auntie Iris telling her story, but also you're hearing the stories of Annette and I, our experiences as early years educators and consultants, the really positive and great work that happens, but also the challenging work that happens, and that it's ongoing. So we continue to, I guess, work as activists. When we think about the framework, we're thinking about fibres, fur and grasses. So we've just talked a little bit about the possum and then how that's used for our children when we think about child rearing practices. And then we think about how the story's shared and then how that possum skin blanket is made. So, that's all a part of pedagogy and that understanding that our children are wrapped within this story that's held within the possum fur and that grows and goes with you is really important and really significant, because it's something that is from birth until it's your time to pass on to the ancestors. And then when we think about First Nations women's voices in early childhood, then we've just talked about how we've heard and talked about different people with different stories in that. So you begin to understand how it's all interlinked and how it's really important that we honour the different ways in which we share knowledge, different ways in which we come to learn about the stories and the diversity that exists within our communities. So we're starting to get a really I like to think of it as weaving, it all becomes woven in to create this beautiful, rich
And when you showed
space.
me your framework, Priscilla, that's what I was thinking of. It reminds me of the weaving that our women did and continue to do.
That's right.
Like it is all interwoven. It is. It doesn't stand alone.
No.
And that's a big part of Aboriginal pedagogy.
Let's move into Dr Sue's children's picture books. Kind of leads us into Dr Sue's picture books around Yuri's birthday, Yuri's Manang, and Bartran Mayala.
And while Sue was writing her PhD, she was also writing these 3 children's stories. I mean, what a deadly woman! What an amazing woman! And
I want to be like her.
me too. And I was really lucky enough for Sue to ask me to do the illustrations for the 3 stories, and so there is that. I've used natural materials, recycled materials, and continuing those themes of sustainability.
Yeah.
Did you want to talk a little bit more about the story?
So caring for country, I guess, Dukandira is Yorta Yorta for
Yes.
wombat.
Yes.
And so one of the things that I came across in my research was how the children up on the Murray River would play a traditional game of hiding in the wombat holes.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Oh, wow.
Yes. So the way that I thought about that knowledge was, okay, I'd really love to play this game in an early childhood space with children. But number one, I don't know whether hiding in the wombat holes is a safe thing.
Risk management.
Yeah, big issues with that. And we're not saying go out and play that game if you go out on country, everybody. But we're saying, the way I modified that was I had a little wombat that belonged to my daughter, and so I would take that and someone would hide it. Everyone would close their eyes, someone would go and hide it in the space, and then you'd have to call out, where's Dukandira? So, it was modifying but being inspired by the knowledge of that game, but also linking it in with the story of Dukandira. But, the important thing with that too was understanding that, I had permission to work and share with this story, the language, and so I wanted to make sure that, we'd read the story and then we could play this game that linked within that. So it was about keeping it, the way in which I worked with that language was keeping it in line with protocols around language. Yes. So,
do you want to talk a little bit about protocols? Because I think that another word for protocols is respectful ways.
Yes. Yeah.
But do you want to talk a little bit about language?
So when I guess language is, as someone who's grown up with hearing phrases of language, I feel really fortunate that I can now access knowledge and continue to learn language as a part of the revitalisation of Gamilaroi language. So, but I guess one of the things is, whilst there's this information that's published, it's challenging when people just come and take it and use it in whatever way they think, and that's scary because it's about understanding that words have context. It's not just, words don't translate the same way that they do in English.
Yeah.
So a word, one of our words might have 5 meanings to it.
Yeah.
And it's also about the tone. So how you're saying that word, it's where you're saying that word, who you're saying that word to. All these other elements come into play when we think about language. Yeah. So I think it's really important that if we are working with language, we have a relationship with community, community members, and that we work respectfully, in respectful ways, by saying, what or how would you like to see your language used?
Yes.
What do you see for your language?
I know in Victoria we have the Victorian Aboriginal Corporation for Languages, so I always say to educators that the first point of call, if they want to be learning more about Victorian Aboriginal languages, is to contact VACL. And the slide that was up at the beginning that showed you the map actually had the website.
Yeah.
And they do have really great resources. And so, as an example, there was a early childhood service in Coburg that was on Wurundjeri country, Woiwurrung language group. And what they did is they had training through VACL because they wanted to change the names of their rooms from colours to bush tucker. So they followed those respectful ways, those protocols in introducing language and renaming of their rooms. So I think that, was a fantastic opportunity for them to make a deeper connection with a Wurundjeri person, with a local community member, and in that way too, their programming became more authentic.
Yes. And it is about the relationships, but also understanding with relationships come responsibilities. and an understanding that with relationships is, we have to give time and have patience and understand that things, it takes time, and that we can't just expect something to happen overnight. And when you have real relationships with people, it's saying, you know what, I actually want to know who you are. It's not always about, I want to know you so that you can tell me what you can tell me. So it's about finding the authenticity within your relationship and who we are as, I guess, as people, showing that the best side of our humanity and how we communicate with each other, and really saying, the work we want to do, we want to keep the integrity in what we do with each other.
Priscilla, I loved hearing about the way you had incorporated a traditional game and the way you adapted it after reading the story of Yuri's birthday, because within the story there is a page where animals are playing games.
Yes.
And in the teaching notes that Sue and I wrote that are within the book, we give you extension ideas for provocation.
Yes.
So the next photo that we have here on the slide is from Brighton Kindergarten, and the children's artwork is just beautiful.
When the Yarn Strong Sista series was launched back in 2013 on Wurundjeri country, and so to be able to be a part of that story was really beautiful. So Annette invited different women in Victoria, Indigenous and non-Indigenous women, to come and to weave a basket, in particular for Yuri's birthday. We're going to focus on that because we could yarn about all the books for a very long time, but we're going to just focus in on that particular book. Or we might be sitting here to our birthday
until it's dark.
Until it's dark. It's getting a bit dark out here in the bush at the moment. So in Yuri's birthday, there are these beautiful baskets woven by different women, and we use different materials. So what is important in that is the basket is important, but it's the stories that weave into your work as you are making that, and that pedagogy that is about the sitting and listening with. As someone who wove the book basket within the book, when I was weaving that, I'd collected, I'm a mad Opstropper fan, but for me that is also about caring for country. So when we collect fibres, it is about using what we can access more readily and thinking about how will this weave, and but most importantly, who's sitting with you when you're weaving the basket? What are the stories you're sharing? Because when you're weaving, you actually weave in that knowledge into your basket. So
they use different natural and recycled and materials in collage, and we really love how they were inspired by the illustrations. And Priscilla had actually collected some of the paper and the materials from Resource Rescue in Cranbourne, for me.
Yes.
And also there were materials within the book from Reverse Art Truck in Ringwood. So what I loved was that children whose early childhood services were members of those organisations had the materials in their collage trolleys.
Yes.
And so they could make the connection with being an illustrator themselves when they were looking at the artwork that I had done.
And a powerful way to be teaching about children as knowledge holders, and that children are capable, they are storytellers. So what a beautiful provocation of materials and thinking with children around a response to what they'd actually heard within a story that's been authored by Dr Sue Atkinson and illustrated by Tangwarang artist Annette, and then also co-illustrated with baskets from Indigenous Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal women within the Victorian community. As we sit out on Cammeraygal country, the sun's going down and the moon is actually up in the sky. We had a half moon tonight. And in Yularoi language, his name's Balu. In Gamilaroi, it's Gilay. So we want you to imagine us sitting in the bush with all these trees, and the light is changing. But we also have different birds. So we've just finished hearing the cockatoos, the moyais flying over country, and we're starting to hear different animal sounds, and we're starting to hear a rustling happening in the bushes and the trees.
And the wind was blowing.
And the wind, yes, the wind had changed, and now it's kind of settled. And so as we move into this change of the environment, I think it links really beautifully with our next slide from Dr. Sue's research.
And it's entitled Aboriginal Elders as Teachers of the Environmental Knowledge. And this is a quote from Sue. Aboriginal families in Victoria continue to educate their children within their own cultural traditions despite the impact of colonisation. Aboriginal elders, as the guardians of culture, are especially important in the sharing of intergenerational skills and knowledge around country with Aboriginal children. Early childhood professionals using appropriate and respectful resources created by Aboriginal people can also share with all children some of the Aboriginal elders' knowledge of the land. A comment about like appropriate resources?
Yeah. I think we've seen a change. Going back to when our children were younger, and there weren't
as many,
like a handful, really, a handful of resources. And so what I see in Yarn Strong Sister are deadly appropriate, culturally appropriate resources, because they are made by Aboriginal people with permission that reflect their everyday lives. And so that is really important. And what I'm not sure whether people understand that some of these resources are actually a reflection of the pedagogy that's held within our knowledge system. So when we look at this particular image of the finger puppets, we have finger puppets that have different skin colours, skin tones. We also see a game that has symbols, so your artwork. And one of the and I guess one of the things that stands out for me is when I'm looking for resources, I want to know who is the Aboriginal person that has given permission for this knowledge to be shared in this particular resource. I think that's really important. That's about having and purchasing an authentic resource.
And I think also if you are purchasing resources online, whether it's on Facebook or whatever, medium it is, you have the right as the customer who ask who has made the product, who is the person Aboriginal that has made the designs. Also, and if you get shut down, if you are asked not to ask those comments on Facebook, then for me that would be a red flag. Yes, that it's not, that the artwork is actually not by an Aboriginal person, and that it's been appropriated and made by a non-Indigenous person.
Yes, yeah. And I think it's important to also say too, Annette, that, we have very clear understandings about what we expect in terms of resources and how they're developed and how we share our knowledge that we've learned within our own communities through the resources. We've got really a clear understanding about what that means for us and how we work respectfully with our community. So what we can do can be very, very different to what other people share. So we want to make that clear too, that they're different communities, different people within communities have different ideas. However, we feel really strongly about supporting and buying authentic resources that have been developed in consultation with Aboriginal communities and by Aboriginal communities, and preferably through ethical, fair trade places.
Yes, yeah.
And also made here in Australia where you can.
Yeah.
Supporting the economy that exists here within
That's
this
right.
space.
It is about the economics of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander businesses, and because when you purchase, say, those beautiful pair of wood-burnt clapsticks from Aaron Nichols, who's an Aboriginal man who lives up in Swan Hill, it's actually supporting him in his business. And we need to get away. We need to make sure that we're not buying imported knockoffs of Aboriginal artefacts like clapsticks and boomerangs.
Yes.
We can't be buying them from China, and we can't be purchasing those resources that are sourced from Indonesia either.
Yeah. Yes.
And it's also about the self-determination as well of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people as Indigenous people. Sue and I were approached by the department to pursue to review the Victorian Early Years Learning and Development Framework, the VELDF, and I would work with Sue around the painting using ochre to reflect her cultural knowledge story that is informed by Aboriginal pedagogy. And so we'd like to pick up on some of the points from the practice principles.
And Ochre Mountain actually came to be from one day when Annette and I took our children for a walk along the creek on Wurundjeri country, and we actually came across Ochre Mountain. So ochre is a pigment that is really important for all our communities. Comes in many different colours. It's a mineral. It's used for painting our bodies in ceremony, painting our bodies in healing, for wellness.
Painting on possum skin cloaks.
Kangaroo fur. There's a whole array of uses.
Yes.
But when Annie Sue thought about Ochre Mountain, this is what she wrote about and reflected on what it meant for Aboriginal children and families and what that would look like in the Victorian Early Years Learning and Development Framework.
That's right. So this is a photograph of Aluka, who is standing up the top there. Then who's my son? He's now 18, and then Priscilla.
James is in the middle, and he's about to turn 18. And then we have Sarah, who is 20, and she's now at ANU doing a degree. A little bit of mum bragging here, but how amazing that she's on Ochre Mountain, and now her work is actually she's studying to work as an archaeologist and anthropologist, so that she can share stories through her people's ways, through Gamilaroi Yularoi knowledge. And
I want to share with you Sue's story. So the child and adult standing on Ochre Mountain symbolises the high equitable expectations we hold for children and adults. The land symbol as Mother Earth represents the basis for respectful relationships and responsive engagement. And I think it's really important for us as early childhood educators to be reflective around our practice as well, and the way that we interact with families and children.
Yes.
And you can see there's a waterhole symbol that is actually around reflective practice. Yep. And I don't know about you, Priscilla, but when I'm being reflective, I like to be near the river or down near the Moonee Ponds Creek.
Yes.
What about, where do you like to be?
Yeah, I think anywhere on country. Yeah, anywhere on country, but when you work within a space within the early years setting, you can. I think early childhood educators can do that anywhere.
Yeah.
And but it is important to
Some people like
understand.
jogging.
Some people like jogging. No, that's not for me. We're not joggers. However, we really, I guess, we really appreciate when we work in spaces with educators who do have high expectations, who value relationships, but who also value Mother Earth.
Yeah.
So, because without her, we don't exist. So, look, there's, I guess, our understandings and unpacking of what we could yarn about within this could be, well, there is so much more to yarn about.
Yeah.
So, but mainly we want to highlight that, this is the amazing work of Dr. Sue, and the beautiful story work, artwork by yourself, and it is it is beautiful, and I think it's amazing that the government has actually worked with you to develop this framework for all children.
Yeah.
So what I love is that it's embedded in Aboriginal knowledge.
Yes. Yeah.
It is embedded in Aboriginal knowledge. So that's pretty deadly.
Is entitled Learning About Their Natural World. So that was actually came from what the elders were saying to Sue when she was interviewing them about what they wanted Aboriginal children to learn about their culture. And so there's a photograph there of my daughter Kiella, who's learning with Tangwarang country in the Yea wetlands. For us, it's really important that we visit regularly. Tangwarang country, Yea is around an hour and a half from Melbourne, and there's some clues there. You can see she's wearing her coat. So it's winter time. We need to walk on the boardwalk because it's flooded. And then as we're walking through that area, which was named Franklin's Track after my great-grandfather, we're seeing, wattle trees and the wattle pods, and I'm able to share with Kiella the traditional uses. And then that is also, within the story of Yuri's birthday, Yuri makes wattle seed tamper for her friends as a gift. And so Sue said learn that it's important for children to, in learning, read the land through reading animal tracks and observing the changes in flora and fauna with the changing of the seasons.
Yeah.
The next slide is entitled Learning About Their Natural World. So that was actually came from what the elders were saying to Sue when she was interviewing them about what they wanted Aboriginal children to learn about their culture. And so there's a photograph there of my daughter Kiella, who's learning with Tangwarang country in the Yea wetlands. For us, it's really important that we visit regularly. Tangwarang country, Yea is around an hour and a half from Melbourne, and there's some clues there. You can see she's wearing her coat. So it's winter time. We need to walk on the boardwalk because it's flooded. And then as we're walking through that area, which was named Franklin's Track after my great-grandfather, we're seeing, wattle trees and the wattle pods, and I'm able to share with Kiella the traditional uses. And then that is also, within the story of Yuri's birthday, Yuri makes wattle seed tamper for her friends as a gift. And so Sue said learn that it's important for children to, in learning, read the land through reading animal tracks and observing the changes in flora and fauna with the changing of the seasons.
Yeah.
So in this photograph here, Kiella is pointing at an animal track that she's spotted in the ground, in the dirt. And this photo was taken a number of years ago when we had travelled onto Yorta Yorta country up to the Barmah forest, and she had found a wallaby track. So, this is part of Kiella learning about her natural environment.
Yeah.
The next slide is a photograph of the beautiful she oak and raffia basket that my Auntie Glenys made. And Auntie Glenys passed away a number of years ago, but she left this basket for us for the story. And Auntie Glenys was a florist, and so she used raffia, which is contemporary,
Yes.
with she oak. And she shared with me many years ago about how traditionally our people the men would collect the timber to make spears from the she oak.
So the she oak tree up on Gamilaroi and Uluru country, and it has significance to the birds, to the ibis. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
So it's also used for other things too. But I'd like to actually acknowledge Auntie Glenys, that she taught me how to make feather flowers. So what we have is this ongoing sharing of our traditional knowledges and showing that we're still practicing culture, we're still sharing our stories, but most importantly that these stories that are shared, whether it be through a PhD, whether it be through an oral yarn, through a children's picture book, through music, through possum fur, through the weaving of baskets, it is still really strong. And these are the practices that we want to see honoured and shared within our early childhood spaces. And I guess what's really important and in that is that it's about honouring the elders' voices. And so for Annette and I, Dr Sue is an elder for us.
Yes.
And that's why we've put together this presentation to honour the work that she has done and to show how rich her research has been and how valuable it is for our work that we do within early childhood, and so that people are more aware of Dr Sue's work, and also acknowledging the elders that have worked with Dr Sue and ourselves. So in this image, Annette, do you want to jump
Yeah,
about
so photo of is of Sue with Auntie Faye Carter, who is a Yorta Yorta and Jajawarang elder. And this photo was taken at Audrey Brooks Memorial Preschool in West Heidelberg on Wurundjeri country. It's at least 10 years ago. And we were running a program around Harmony Day, and Auntie Faye was sharing her life story of growing up on Cumragunja Mission, and with Aboriginal and Somali women.
Yeah.
So in closing, we'd like to say Gi
And Yalu.
and share a special poem with you that Sue wrote. May the Aboriginal elders lead you to walk respectfully with Aboriginal people, lead you to see the wisdom in the earth, air and rivers.
Lead you to hear their stories of life, land and being. May the elders' voices guide you in courage and wisdom. Sue Atkinson, Yorta Yorta. So Annette and I just wanted to show you how crazy we were in staying out here in the dark and finishing our filming of our learning series that we're going to be sharing with you around honouring First Nations women's voices in early childhood space. So as the sun's gone down, Walu's in the sky, the Miri is shining, that's the sun. We're going to sing a song to finish up, and we've got Annette's beautiful possum fur skin drum that's been painted in beautiful ochres. and holds a really deep, important story. And we're going to sing a song. I'm going to sing the song in Gamilaroi, and it's Yalu Gunima. So we're saying Yalu Gunima because it's night time. We're coming into rest, and we thought it'd just be a nice way to finish up our workshop. So here goes. Yalu Gunima, Yalu Gunima, Yalu Gunima, Yalu Gunima. Yalu Gunima, Yalu Gunima, Yalu Gunima, Yalu Gunima. Little bit quieter now. Yalu Gunima, Yalu Gunima, Yalu Gunima, Yalu Gunima. Yalu.
Hey.
Thank you for joining us and learning with us.
Yes.
And we hope to share more yarns with you and more stories around honouring First Nations women in early childhood. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact us.
And call us on our mobile.